I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the time on the calendar invite. 9:27 a.m. Not 9. Not 9:30. 9:27. Like they'd calculated the precise second to catch me off guard. The subject line? Organizational reset. Corporate code 4, we're about to erase you and call it innovation. My stomach dropped before I even opened the invite. It was from Rachel in HR. And CC'd? Trent Holloway, my manager. The same Trent I'd helped navigate 5 product launches, 2 crisis pivots, and a whole quarter where he didn't know what an EBITDA was. By the time I walked into conference room B3, Rachel was already there smiling like someone who'd rehearsed this ambush in the mirror. Trent? He couldn't even look at me. Just stared into his coffee like he was searching for courage at the bottom of the cup. Madeline, Rachel began. Thanks for making time on such short notice. The chair was already pulled out. That only ever happens when they're about to offer you a cake or cut your head off. Then came the speech. Buzzwords. Repetition. Euphemisms dressed up as compassion. In light of strategic restructuring. Optimizing operational efficiency. Your role has been deemed redundant. Redundant. Like a faulty cable. Like I wasn't the woman who wrote the original ops playbook they still used. Like I hadn't trained half of the new hires Trent now pretended to manage. I waited for him to speak. He didn't. Not even a sorry. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a firing. It was an erasure. A quiet little corporate execution, signed, sealed, and buzzword delivered. You think loyalty protects you. You think 10 years means something. Turns out it means you're too expensive to keep. If you've ever walked into a meeting and felt your worth shrink with every buzzword they threw at you, hit subscribe. You're not alone, and this story is just getting started. Rachel Sloan was already waiting when I walked in. She stood at the far end of the room like she owned it, arms lightly resting on the edge of the table, back straight, lips curled into that signature HR smile, the kind that says, "We care deeply about this transition," while actively preparing to gut you. Her blazer was cream. Not white cream. Clean, smooth, unwrinkled. It was the kind of outfit you wear when you're not just ready to deliver bad news, you've rehearsed it. Maybe even enjoyed the rehearsal. I hated that I noticed those things. Trent, meanwhile, was a mess. He was seated slouched, actually across from Rachel, both hands gripping a paper cup of coffee like it was the only warm thing left in his life. He didn't look up when I entered. He didn't say my name. His eyes were fixed on the cup lid like there was some kind of secret HR escape plan printed on it. This was the man I had backed for nearly a decade. The man who once cried in my office when the product team missed a launch deadline, and I stayed late 3 nights in a row to rewrite the recovery roadmap. The man who used to say, "You're the backbone of this team, Maddie." He couldn't even look me in the eye. "Madeline," Rachel said again, motioning to the seat across from them, "please." Diller. The chair was already pulled out. It was subtle, but deliberate. In HR choreography, that's a signal. We've already decided. All that's left is to walk you to the door. They don't pull out the chair for casual policy updates or new team assignments. They pull it out when the decision's final and all that's missing is your signature. I sat down, slowly. There was a notepad in front of Rachel, already filled with bullet points. She didn't touch it. Trent cleared his throat but said nothing. The silence pressed in around us. And then Rachel spoke. "First, I just want to acknowledge the work you've done here at Citrine Systems. Your contributions over the past 9 years have been deeply appreciated." Appreciated. That word again. It always came before the knife. Rachel continued. "As part of our larger organizational restructuring, we've had to make some difficult decisions. Your position, unfortunately, is one of several that have been impacted." I didn't flinch. Not yet. But something inside me cracked quietly, like a hairline fracture. Because this wasn't just business. This was betrayal. Betrayal, dressed in pastels and polished vowels. Trent finally shifted, as if to say something, but when I turned to him, really turned to him, he just nodded. A small, mechanical motion, like a bobblehead doll with dead batteries. That nod. That was the worst part. It wasn't the news. It wasn't even the HR script. It was that he let someone else fire me. After all the wins, the late nights, the blind loyalty handed me over like a missed calendar invite. Rachel said something about a transition plan. Something about Cobra benefits. Something about next steps. I barely heard her. My ears were ringing, but not from shock. It was the sound of rage, coiling quiet beneath my ribs, settling in like a storm. They were smiling at me like I was supposed to smile back. But I wasn't done yet. I didn't know how. But I knew this wasn't where my story ended. This was where it started. Rachel didn't pause. She didn't ask if I had questions. She didn't even blink. Instead, she reached down and slid a folder across the table like it was a menu, not a life-altering document. A slim, pristine, corporate blue folder, Citrine Systems embossed on the front, like a cruel little flourish. "This," she said, tapping the cover lightly, "is your transition packet." I didn't touch it. Not yet. Touching it felt too final. Like I'd accepted something I hadn't agreed to. Inside, she explained, were my severance terms, Colorado BRA continuation info, final paycheck details, and her words, not mine, a mutual release of claims. Translation. Here's your gag order. Sign it and disappear quietly. I scanned the first page. 2 weeks' pay. No bonuses. No accrued vacation payout. An NDA clause that practically had its own zip code. That was it. 9 years of service. Countless project recoveries. 3 emergency system rebuilds that saved the company more than they ever admitted. All reduced to 2 weeks' salary and a suggestion to call a therapy hotline if I felt emotionally displaced. Trent shifted in his seat like the guilt was finally beginning to itch, but still he didn't speak. My fingers hovered over the edge of the folder. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't even going to yell. But my throat burned. Not because I needed the money, though. God knows Austin rent isn't getting cheaper. It was the insult of it all. The way they packaged dismissal like a farewell gift. The assumption that I'd say thank you for being quietly erased. Rachel kept talking something about timely signatures and processing timelines. Her voice was smooth, practiced, like she'd read this script 100 times. Maybe she had, but I'd never been the audience for it before. And something about hearing it from this side of the table after everything I'd built here made it feel personal, no matter how many times they insisted it wasn't. Trent finally cleared his throat. "You know this isn't personal, Maddie," he said, eyes still on the table. I let out a sharp breath. Almost a laugh. "Is that what you told yourself?" I asked. "While you let someone else do the cutting?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, but the damage had already landed. I opened the folder and flipped through just enough pages to confirm what I already knew. They weren't offering me a future. They were offering me silence. They were hoping I'd take it. Rachel folded her hands. "We do appreciate your service," she said again. That word. Appreciate. They used it like a farewell balloon. Something you wave while pushing someone off a cliff. I stood. The chair scraped against the tile, louder than expected in that sterile, glass-walled room. "I'll need time to review it," I said evenly. Rachel blinked, clearly not used to pushback. Trent just froze. "You're not signing now?" she asked. "Not today," I said. And with that, I walked out, the folder in hand, my jaw locked tight. I didn't have a plan. Not yet. But something told me this was far from over. Because if they thought I was going to vanish quietly, they hadn't been paying attention. I don't remember walking back to my car. Somewhere between the sterile conference room and the parking garage elevator, my mind just shut off like a circuit breaker tripped to keep the grief from frying the whole system. By the time I sat behind the wheel, the folder was still clutched in my hand, my knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. I stared straight ahead at the concrete wall in front of me for what felt like a full hour. I couldn't even start the engine. The silence was deafening. Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of meaning. I'd spent 9 years giving everything I had to Citrine Systems. I built process maps from scratch, led the emergency migration when the vendor system failed in 2018, rewrote their disaster recovery protocol with zero budget and a 2-week timeline. I made things work when they weren't supposed to work. And they erased me in a 30-minute meeting with free coffee. Back at my apartment, I didn't even make it to the couch. I just dropped the folder onto the kitchen counter and sank to the floor, my back pressed against the cabinets, knees drawn up like they were the only part of me that still had structure. Maple-Me Golden Retriever wandered over and rested her chin on my leg. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She just stayed. I ran my fingers through her fur and whispered, I thought I'd leave that place on my own terms. I always pictured it some big career move, a celebration, a better offer. Not this. Not a hollow exit wrapped in legal disclaimers and a promise to remain professional. The hours blurred. I unpacked the little cardboard box I'd carried out of the building. One branded coffee mug. A half-dead desk plant. A plastic plaque for Outstanding Team Spirit, Q3, WW. No one even signed the back. The real gut punch came at the bottom. A laminated copy of the internal training module I had written 2 years ago. Resilience and recognition in a fast-changing workplace. Oh, the irony. I should have felt humiliated. Broken even. But I didn't. What I felt was offended. Like they hadn't just fired me, they had underestimated me. They assumed I'd walk away quietly. They forgot who they were dealing with. I wasn't a junior analyst with no leverage. I wasn't new. I knew the system because I helped build it. And somewhere, buried in that forgotten pile of documents and memories, there had to be something they missed. Some policy, some clause, some oversight that proved I wasn't as disposable as they thought. Because if there's one thing I've learned from nearly a decade inside a tech company that worships loopholes and lingo, it's this. The fine print always holds the power. I didn't have the words yet. Didn't have the plan. But I had the spark. They thought they'd buried me in paperwork. Turns out they handed me a shovel. At 2:11 a.m., I was sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by 10 years of forgotten paperwork, a half-empty glass of wine, and the persistent hum of my ceiling fan that suddenly sounded like a ticking clock. I hadn't slept. Couldn't. My brain refused to shut down. It was running scenarios on loop. What could I have done differently? Should I have seen this coming? Did I let my loyalty blind me? But underneath those spirals, something sharper had begun to rise. Not grief. Not even rage. It was clarity. I opened the dusty black accordion folder. I'd pulled from the back of my filing cabinet something I hadn't touched since I first joined Citrine Systems back in 2015. Inside were printouts from my onboarding, tax forms, policy acknowledgments, and one single-page document on heavy stock paper that still smelled faintly like toner and misplaced trust. My original offer letter. I flipped through it slowly, not really sure what I was looking for, maybe a reminder of who I used to be back when I thought this company would be a forever kind of place. Then I saw it. Page 4. Buried in the fine print like a secret waiting to be uncovered. All unvested shares under the Equity Incentive Program shall become fully vested upon termination by the company without cause. I froze. Read it again. Then again. Each word burned itself into my brain like a slow dawn rising over a battlefield. Fully vested. Upon termination. Without cause. I wasn't fired for misconduct. There was no investigation, no warnings. They said it themselves. This isn't personal. Translation? You didn't do anything wrong. We just wanted you gone. M's vote too. And that phrase? Termination without cause? It unlocked the clause like a key. I stared down at the paper, breath caught in my chest. Because if that clause was still valid, if they'd never rescinded it or updated it out of existence, then the shares I'd received, the refresh grants I thought I'd lost, they weren't gone. They were mine. Not pending. Not maybe. Mine. Ever found something hidden in the fine print that changed the game? Drop it in the comments. Your story might just help someone else fighting to be seen. I took out my phone and snapped a picture. Then another. Then a video, just in case my phone decided to die or Citrine's IT team somehow reached across time and deleted reality. I didn't know how many shares it was. Didn't know what they were worth. Didn't even know if the clause had been legally tested before. But I knew what I had. Leverage. They fired me thinking I'd fade into the silence. But the silence? That's where I read everything they hoped I wouldn't. The folder snapped shut like a gavel. And for the first time since that 9/27 meeting, I felt power. By 9:00 a.m., I had a list of 8 employment lawyers in the Austin area. By 10:15, I had narrowed it down to 2. By 11:00, I was staring at a Google review that said, "If you want empathy, go elsewhere. If you want results, hire Nina Patel." That was the moment I knew. Her office wasn't downtown. It was above a laundromat in East Austin, squeezed between a bail bonds place and an herbal vape shop. No receptionist. No glass walls. Just a weathered bronze placard that read, "Nina Patel, Employment Law." I rang the buzzer once. Waited. Then a voice muffled, scratchy, but firm shouted through the intercom. "If you're selling toner, turn around. If you're bleeding legally, come in." I pushed the door open and stepped into what looked like a law office built inside a filing cabinet from 1996. There were boxes stacked waist-high, books piled on chairs, and a smell that could only be described as burnt coffee and unfiled justice. She didn't get up, didn't shake my hand, just looked at me over the top of her reading glasses and said, "You Maddie Cross?" I nodded. She pointed to the chair across from her desk. "Sit, start talking." I did. I told her everything. From the 9/27 email to the HR script, the folder, the NDA. I told her about Trent's silence, about the training I'd written, the loyalty I'd handed over like free overtime. Then I handed her the offer letter. Page 4. The clause. She read it once. Then again, slower. Then she leaned back in her chair and grinned. Not the performative smile I'd seen in HR. This one was sharp. Predatory. "Tell me," she said, tapping the paper. "Did they mention this clause in your separation documents?" "No," I said, "not even once." Her grin widened like a trap door opening under someone else's feet. "Good. That means they're either sloppy or arrogant. Both are useful." Something in my chest loosened. Not relief. Not yet. But something close like the first deep breath after holding it too long. I leaned forward. "They might argue it's outdated," I said. "Or that it was superseded by internal policy." Nina chuckled. "They can argue the moon is made of brisket, doesn't make it true." She slid the letter to the side, opened a notebook, and started writing fast, like she was already halfway through the case before I'd even finished speaking. "They terminated you without cause. That clause activates. You're entitled to every share." She looked up. "Now the only question is, do you want the payout or do you want the war?" He blinked. "Can I say both?" Her smirk turned surgical. "Welcome to litigation, sweetheart. Let's ruin someone's week." I wasn't sure what I expected when I walked into her office. Maybe someone in heels and a sleek suit, someone who would tell me gently that it wasn't worth the fight. But Nina Patel didn't do gentle. She did legal blood sport. And for the first time since that meeting room chair scraped the tile floor behind me, I didn't feel erased. I felt armed. Nina didn't believe in email drafts. She believed in fire. And for the next 2 days, she wrote like she was wielding a blowtorch. I wasn't allowed to hover. That was rule 1. Let the hunter hunt, she told me when I checked in the first morning, pacing my apartment like a caffeine-fueled Roomba with too much anxiety and not enough purpose. Still, I couldn't help it. By day 3, I had built a spreadsheet labeled possible outcomes with 3 tabs. 1. They fold. 2. They fight and lose. 3. Trent gets fired and becomes a life coach. It was funny, but not that funny. By noon, I was refreshing my inbox like it owed me closure. Nina finally called at 3:46 p.m. sharp. "It's ready." That's all she said. I drove over immediately, my pulse somewhere between terrified and thrilled. Her office smelled the same. Printer ink, dusty law books, and war. She handed me the letter. It wasn't long. Barely 2 pages. But it was surgical. It quoted the original equity clause verbatim. Then cited Trent's exact words from my termination meeting. "This isn't personal." That one sentence, Nina explained, was the nail. Because it confirmed I wasn't fired for performance or cause, which meant the clause applied. Then came the dagger. She framed the omission of the equity clause from my severance paperwork as a breach of good faith. Not illegal on its own, but enough to suggest intent. Enough to make them sweat. "You don't need to prove malice," she said. "You just need to show neglect." And they've handed us both. She folded the letter neatly, slid it into a cream envelope like she was tucking in a live grenade. "They won't reply right away," she said. "They'll pretend they're not panicked. They'll forward it to legal, to HR, to someone named Brent who always wears boat shoes and thinks governance is optional." I laughed for the first time in days. Not just polite laughter, real laughter. "And then?" I asked. She smiled. "And then we wait." At 9:01 the next morning, she hit send. Subject line: Equity clause, Madeline Cross, termination review. No fluff. No emotion. Just facts lined up like charges in a courtroom. And then silence. The kind of silence that feels intentional. Like the walls of a boardroom just got quieter than they should. Like someone's calendar got cleared. Like someone in legal said, "Oh no." I checked my email every 10 minutes. Then every 5. By noon, I'd memorized the way Gmail refreshed. Nothing. No bounce back. No response. No acknowledgement. Just the hum of a system that had no idea what storm had just been dropped into its inbox. That night, Nina texted me just 3 words. "Still too quiet." I stared at those words for a long time. Because she was right. The silence wasn't indifference. It was calculation. It was internal Slack threads, frantic PDF searches, and panic-drenched coffee runs. And somewhere behind a desk with brushed steel edges and an inspirational quote on the wall, someone had just realized. They hadn't fired me. They'd awakened me. The text came at 1:08 a.m. I was awake, of course. Sleep hadn't visited in days. Not since the letter went out. I'd been scrolling aimlessly, switching between LinkedIn and some legal subreddits. I barely understood, half looking for distraction, half hoping for confirmation that I wasn't crazy for doing all this. Then my phone buzzed. Nick Holloway, my former boss. The same man who sat in silence while I was walked out like a stray file someone forgot to back up. The message said, "What the hell did you do?" End of no question mark. Just 6 words. And all of them dripping with panic. I stared at the screen. Let it sit there. Let him sit there. I could feel it. Even through the pixel she wasn't angry. He was rattled. Scared. I waited a full minute before replying. "Evening, Nick. Didn't expect to hear from you." 3 dots appeared. Paused. Vanished. Appeared again. This letter. It's everywhere. Legal's on fire. They pulled me into a 6 a.m. meeting. CFO's freaking out. HR is reviewing protocols from 2015. I leaned back into the couch, coffee gone cold beside me. For the first time since this whole thing started, I felt calm. "They said you triggered a reclassification," he wrote. "Do you realize what that clause does?" I did. I hadn't known the exact numbers. Hadn't known they forgot to remove me from the active equity pool. Hadn't known that, by firing me without cause, they inadvertently handed me 1.28% of the last grant cycle shares they now had to account for. What I did know, they underestimated me. And now, someone was doing math at a boardroom table with shaking hands. If you've ever had a moment where someone finally realized they miscalculated your worth, share it below. Your story might be the spark someone else needs. Nick tried to call. I let it ring twice before picking up. Madeline. He started, breath shallow, voice tight. This is serious. You don't understand. No, I cut in. You don't understand. He was quiet. You thought I'd just disappear, I said. Take your script, your NDA, and vanish. Silence. You didn't just fire me, Nick. You turned me into something a lot harder to ignore. I could hear him exhale slowly like a man realizing the room he's in is full of smoke, but the fire already started hours ago. I liked you, he said weakly. You were good. No, I replied, steady. You liked that. I solved your messes. Quietly, efficiently, without making waves. I let the pause linger. But here's the thing about quiet people, Nick, when we finally speak, everyone listens. He didn't argue. Didn't apologize. Didn't say goodbye. The line went dead. I set the phone down. Somewhere in that office tower of glass and buzzwords, they were scrambling, drawing flowcharts, whispering across Slack threads, wondering how one woman with a folder of old paperwork and a very good lawyer had just upended their quarter. I didn't need headlines, didn't need a LinkedIn post. All I needed was the sound of silence on the other end of the line. They scheduled the meeting for Friday, 1:00 a.m. Same building, same floor, same glass-walled conference room where they first erased me. But this time, I didn't carry a cardboard box. I wasn't escorted. I didn't sit alone across from an ambush. This time, I walked in with Nina. She led the way like a general entering a territory she already owned, briefcase in one hand, no-nonsense blazer, zero small talk. I followed close behind, my breath steady, my heels silent on the tile. There were 6 people already in the room when we entered. 2 from legal, 1 from HR, a finance rep, the regional COO, and at the head of the table, Dan Forrester, CEO of Citrine Systems. He stood up when we entered, extended a hand like it was all very civilized. Madeline, thank you for coming. We appreciate the chance to speak in person. Nina didn't return the gesture. She set her binder down on the table with a quiet thud, flipped it open, and said, Let's talk about your company's definition of standard policy. The room went still. No one touched their coffee. No one blinked. The projector behind us lit up in a pale beige glow, and Nina tapped a key on her laptop. Up came the clause. Highlighted. Underlined. Annotated like it was prepped for trial. All unvested shares shall become fully vested upon termination without cause. She read aloud, her voice crisp enough to cut drywall. One of the legal reps opened his mouth like he was about to object. She raised a hand. We'll get to you. I want to hear from Greg first. Greg, head of HR. The same one who signed off on my departure paperwork, looked like a man who just realized his parachute was missing. I didn't see the clause at the time, he stammered. It wasn't included in the severance template. Nina arched a brow. And yet, it's in her original, signed contract, which, unless your policy now overrides contract law, still holds. She let that sink in. Unless your version of good faith includes withholding legally binding compensation, of course. There was a pause. Dan, the CEO, leaned forward, hands clasped. Look, we're not here to argue, we're here to make this right. Nina didn't blink. Then let's start by acknowledging the shares vested the moment you fired her. Without cause. The second legal rep spoke, his tone smoother but no less anxious. We're open to exploring an alternative arrangement. A buyout, perhaps. That's when I spoke. And the whole room turned toward me. I'm not here to sell. I'm not here to fold. I looked each of them in the eye. I'm here to remind you that I wasn't your mistake. I was your blind spot. And now, I'm your problem. Nina gave the smallest of nods. Dan rubbed his forehead like he could wipe this all away with enough friction. We're trying to be reasonable, he said. Nina tilted her head. You know what would have been reasonable? Reading her contract. Or not letting Greg sign off on anything more complex than office bagels. Greg looked like he might be sick. And in that moment, for the first time in weeks, I felt it not revenge, not rage. Power. Not because I shouted, but because they finally had to listen. They slid the paper across the table like it was a peace offering. A single folded page, cream stock, formal header. Dan didn't say the number out loud. He didn't have to. One of the lawyers did it for him. One-time payout. Full value of the vested shares, plus 20%. Wire transfer by close of business, NDA included. I didn't reach for it. Neither did Nina. The air in the room shifted. The kind of shift that happens when people realize their leverage is slipping out from under them, and the only thing left is performance. Dan leaned forward, tone carefully neutral. We think this is generous, fair, even. Nina didn't flinch. It's not generous, it's hush money. The words cut clean through the table like wire through butter. She turned to me, then back to them. Let me be clear, you have two options. She slid her binder toward the center, cracking it open like a legal scalpel. Option 1. By 5 p.m. today, you wire the full market value of all vested shares, dated from the exact day of Miss Cross's termination. No NDA, no silence clause. Just clean compensation. She paused. Let it sit. Option 2. A junior legal counsel tried to interject, probably regretted it halfway through his inhale. Nina held up a single finger. Option 2. She keeps the shares. She becomes an active shareholder. And she starts filing motions. Another pause. Dead silence. Even Greg stopped pretending to take notes. Motion 1. A formal audit of all terminations involving suppressed equity claims, followed by a demand for board minutes, internal comp memos, and a public review of your HR process. She looked straight at Greg. Including your certifications. Greg made a noise that was somewhere between a hiccup and a prayer. We'll also exercise full shareholder rights publicly, which means press inquiries, investor calls, and phrases like governance failure and bad faith termination start appearing on earnings reports. Dan's face drained. It was like watching someone realize they just ran the numbers wrong on a quarterly report and submitted it to the SEC. I leaned forward, voice steady. You treated me like a disposable line item. A cost to cut. But now I'm the line you can't erase. I let the words settle in their chests like concrete. Either pay me what I'm owed or I'll be at the next shareholder meeting asking Greg to define standard policy under oath. That was the moment everything cracked. The HR rep looked away. The finance lead uncrossed his arms. Dan stared at the table like the numbers had just turned to ash. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like someone who lost something. I felt like someone who reclaimed it. Because the truth is, there's a line companies love to dance around. A line between policy and ethics. Between oversight and omission. Between cutting costs and cutting corners. And today, they didn't get to cross it. It arrived at 3:42 p.m. A short email. No greeting. No signature. Just the subject line. Wire confirmation. Equity settlement. Madeline Cross. No fanfare. No apology. Just numbers. I opened it in silence, sitting at the same kitchen table where, just a week ago, I'd collapsed with a box of my career on one side and my dog on the other. There it was. The total. 7 digits. Clean. Clear. Confirmed. I didn't cry. Didn't cheer. Didn't call anyone. There was no champagne. No music. No screenshot to post on LinkedIn with a caption about resilience or the power of knowing your worth. I just stared at the number for a while until my eyes started to blur and I had to blink it back into focus. Then I stood up, walked to the pantry, pulled out Maple's favorite chicken jerky, tore open the bag, and dropped an extra piece into her bowl. She looked up at me like she knew something had shifted. Maybe she did. I poured myself a glass of water, not wine. The victory didn't feel intoxicating. It felt exact. Like the final click of a combination lock. I walked back to my laptop, opened my inbox, and started typing. Search, Citrine Systems. Select all. Delete. Trash emptied. Done. I didn't hesitate, because this wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about punishment. Or revenge. Or leverage. It was about closing the file on a version of myself I no longer owed anything to. The woman who gave everything for the company. Who stayed late and skipped lunch. Who smiled through credit being redirected and meetings being hijacked. Who believed that loyalty was a currency with guaranteed return. She got paid today. But I did something else. I got free. There's a kind of quiet that follows a storm, the kind where the air feels a little too still, like the world is waiting for you to decide what to do next. That was this. Not celebration. Clarity. I didn't need confetti. I needed space. And, maybe, a blank document, waiting to be filled with something that didn't start with per my last email. So, I opened a new note. Typed 5 words. They erased me. I returned. And hit save. That was it. No parade. Just peace. There was no moment where everything suddenly made sense. No perfect sunrise. No slow-motion smile in the mirror. No dramatic music cue telling me this is where you become whole again. But there was a morning quiet, gray, still when I made coffee, sat on my balcony in a hoodie I hadn't worn in years, and realized I didn't feel like I was bracing for something anymore. And that was enough. I'd spent years believing certain things without question. That loyalty protected you. That if you worked hard enough, someone would notice. That being essential meant being safe. But none of that is true. Not in rooms built on power and performance reviews. Not in companies that measure worth by salary lines and budget cuts. Here's what I learned instead. Silence doesn't make you safer. It makes you easier to replace. They never taught us that. In school, in onboarding, in mentorship circles, no one warned us that being agreeable could become a liability. That being dependable might be the reason you're taken for granted. I used to think that speaking up made you difficult. Now I know it makes you visible. I used to think contracts were just formality. Now I know there are more if you read them. No one teaches you how to advocate for yourself when the system is designed to make you feel grateful just to be included. But here's the truth. You are not lucky to be invited. You are valuable to be needed. And you are powerful when you know the difference. That clause in my contract? It was only half the story. The other half was me choosing to fight, choosing to believe I was worth more than a quiet exit. And I was. If you've ever been made to feel replaceable, invisible, or small, leave a comment. Not just for me, for the next person scrolling in silence, wondering if their story matters. It does, and so do you. I fed Maple her dinner early that evening. She didn't care about settlements or shares. She just cared that I was home. And I was. Fully present. Fully paid. Fully seen. Not because I asked politely. Because I stood up. And in a world that trains you to stay quiet, sometimes that's the loudest thing you'll ever do.